Okay, so next we're going to talk about requirement two, which is another reason why comparative advantage might change in a country. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about is changing demography. Okay, so countries comparative advantage can also change due to demographic changes. So demography is a chim word for basically things that have to change with the have to have changes to your population size and composition. Yeah, that's a short form for it. Okay, so we're going to say there's going to be changes in our demography, which will change our factor endowment. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna start. Okay, so maybe we can give some examples. So one you wanna first thing you wanna do, you wanna describe the event a bit. This one there's no technical terms, yeah. This one is just using your own words, in your own knowledge, trying to describe what happens or what examples you know where the country's population has changed very significantly. Yeah, so maybe we can say that faced with an aging population. Faced with an aging population, many countries like for example Singapore, yeah, China because of its one child policy, South Korea, increasingly also Japan, South Korea. They are all facing shrinking populations, shrinking populations. Many of them have birth rates that are below the replacement rate. So the replacement rate is 2.1. Yeah, each couple is supposed to produce 2.1 children to replace themselves, right? So that's why it's called replacement rate. But many of these countries are not. Their birth rates are way below the replacement rate, including ours. Yeah. Yeah, so when that happens, then there are two things happening. One is that you got less and less labor, so that's one, and then also you got this another phenomenon, which is a good thing, but so your workers are also becoming increasingly educated and skilled. Yeah, increasingly educated and skilled. So educated meaning they start to pursue university education. Okay, they start to pursue your university education. So all this collectively would lead to changes in your factor endowment. So that's one. Okay. Okay, so then we go next thing we're gonna try and do is we see whether we can link it to op cost here. Okay, so we can say that therefore the production of labor intensive products require or result in you sacrificing an increasingly larger and larger amounts of capital intensive and knowledge based goods and services. Yeah, so products require or result in foregoing or country foregoing a larger quantity of capital, either capital intensive because your workers are so skilled they can work with capital goods, or knowledge based goods and services. So knowledge-based services, okay, non-knowledge-based services will be things like maybe pedicures, manicures, barbers, hairdressers, things like that, retail assistants. Knowledge-based services will be your things like working in the finance industry, working as a software engineer, working as lawyers, things like that. They require a substantial amount of education before you have to perform these kinds of or produce these kind of goods and services. Yeah, so two things happen as a result, right? So then you start to have an increase in the opportunity cost of producing labor intensive goods and services, and a decrease in the opportunity cost of producing knowledge based or capital intensive goods and services. Or capital intensive. K intensive is capital intensive goods and services. Yeah. So what happens as a result? The country will gain an country. As the country, maybe let's write it below. As the country gains a CA in capital intensive or knowledge based goods and services, then it loses its CA in labor intensive, in producing labor intensive goods and services. Okay, so this is another reason why countries' comparative advantage might change, because of demographic changes and because your population is increasingly more and more educated. Okay, I got one more thing I want to say. So maybe just I want to do a recap and I just want to say one thing. Okay, so let me just put it in blue so that you know. So there are two events that I've described here, right? One is I chose government policies, and the second one I chose was demographic changes. Yeah. Okay, these things are not really inside. They're not memorizable in the sense they're not really like they don't have stock paragraph inside the notes that you can just lift from. Yeah. So this one requires sort of your like This one requires sort of your own knowledge. Oops. Oh, did it crash? Oh dear. Okay. So sorry. So this one requires your own knowledge. Yeah, so maybe the first one was government policies, and then the second one was demography. Right. So these two actually they are not really something that you can leave from the lecture notes. Okay. So this one requires your own examples and own substantiation. I do want to tell you that I have read other factors that were also equally as well elaborated. So what I'm trying to tell you is that you don't need to stick to these two. You adapt according to the case material and adapt according to what you can do best. Okay, so the other one that I read that was quite good was depletion or discovery of natural resources. One student that I previously taught described this very well, even though this wasn't inside the lecture notes. And so what he wrote was that he gave the example of shale oil in the US. Okay, that this new shale oil is a new way of drilling for oil. It's the oil that you retrieve using this new method of production called horizontal drilling. Yeah, so he knows about that and he wrote about that. And interestingly, actually, this is totally legit. What happened for this is that the US actually became from a net oil importer, so they were importing oil to run their economy. After the discovery of shale oil and the improved technology, actually they became a net oil exporter. So definitely there was a change in the CA then. Okay, if you don't know anything about this, it's fine. Okay, you can go for these two. The main point I want to get across to you is that in terms of 1 and 2, it's not fixed. It's not always you have to write 1 and 2. Adapt using the case material. Choose are the factors that you can elaborate best. Okay, so that's what I want to say for essay question 3A on page 61. Okay, last point I want to make. So like what I mentioned, if you know how to do this question, you will know how to do this question. This question asks you, why might the rising share of services in Singapore's exports indicate about the changes in Singapore's comparative advantage over time? So the story goes that Singapore has an increasing share of services. Okay, an increasing share of services means that our comparative advantage is changing, and the comparative advantage is changing EA for Singapore, and our comparative advantage is changing because of the change in our factor endowment and changes to the cost of production. That's why I told you to refer to page 61, essay question 3A, because the explanation is very similar. Okay? That's all I want to say for this question.